Welcome back to The Other Side, Part 2. In this video, we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. Mark 5:1 begins, "They came to the other side of the sea into the region of the Gerasenes." Now, we don't know exactly where this is, but we do know it is somewhere on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And what was interesting about this is it's the Gentile side of the Sea of Galilee. The map on the left shows you some of the terrain around it, and it's listing 3 cities, maybe kind of hard to see on the screen, but Cursi, Hippos, and Gadara Harbor along the eastern shore. Each of these could have been plausible locations, and we'll see through some pictures that the terrain is remarkably consistent here. So as we mentioned in the last video, the other side is, yes, it's the other side of the lake. They're going from one side to the other side. But there are also political boundaries, as you see on this map. The 3 different colors around the lake are 3 different political territories. The yellow in the Sea of Galilee, around the Sea of Galilee, called Galilee, would be Herod Antipas. The gray, you can't quite see it. It's Gallinitis. It's Herod Philip's territory. And then the gold color is the Decapolis. And so you can see Hippos, Gadara, and Scythopolis are some cities that are in the pagan cities of the Decapolis. So you've got these political boundaries. You're going from one, basically, traveling from state to state. You're going from one region to another. There are also ethnic boundaries because you have the Jews that were primarily in Galilee and Gallinitis, and then, around the sea anyway, and then you had total Gentiles that were in Decapolis. So it was Jewish, Gentile divisions there. You also had religious, devout Jews on the north side. On the south side, where you can see the city named Tiberias, that was the southwest side, and those tended to be they're called Hellenistic Jews. They were sort of like Sunday Christians. They would go to synagogue, but then the rest of the time they would live like Greeks and Romans. And so they're the compromisers. And then, as we mentioned, you have the pagans on the southeast side of the Sea of Galilee. So yes, other side, literally the other side, but also has a charged meaning, because if you're going to the other side of the Sea of Galilee in the first century, that just means a whole lot more. What's interesting about the Decapolis and the Gentile regions is Jesus doesn't usually go here. And just as we saw at the end of Mark 4, and we see in Mark chapter 5, the demons are apparently none too pleased that Jesus is making this stop on his teaching itinerary. So they're trying to block him. They're trying to, they're upset that all this is happening. And so that's kind of a clue that something different is happening in this story. As far as the town of Cursi, which is one of the possible locations, here's a picture of the shoreline from Gadara, and you can see all of it's very similar. You have these high cliffs rolling into the sea at a pretty rapid pace. The Cursi, according to the Jews, was one of the 5 appointed temples of idolatry, and the sages actually prohibited Jews from going there. So now, with that in mind, imagine when Jesus says at the beginning of our story last time, "Let's go to the other side." The disciples are going, "You sure about that? What do you mean?" But if the sages prohibited Jews from going there, Jesus doesn't roll like that, right? The people there need saving. And I guess a lesson for us is be careful that what are seemingly appropriate safeguards, we obviously don't want to mix with idolatry, but we also need to reach the lost. And so we are supposed to be in the world, but we are not to become of the world. And that's the only way that we can spread the message, is by sometimes we have to go into these hostile regions. And again, you can see the geographic points that will later become very important in the story. The whole eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, or most of it anyway, looks a lot like this. You have these hills sharply rolling into the sea. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him anymore, not even with the chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains, cutting himself with stones. There's a chiasm happening here that I will talk about at the end. I don't want to interrupt the story here. But when he got out of the boat, the man was in the tombs. As you can see here, the burial caves in those days were large enough for people to move around and sleep in. And they would often start with what is a natural cave in the rock formation and then hand scrape it to enlarge it. And many of these tombs have been reused by people over the millennia. This one in the picture is near Hippos. We'll never know which exact tomb that this man was in, but it probably looked a lot like this. So what do we take away so far? He's an unclean man living in an unclean place, possessed by unclean spirits. So is Jesus' mission somehow to cleanse the unclean? We're going to see that continue in the next lesson when we talk about the woman with the issue of blood and then the healing of Jairus' daughter. Luke tells us that this man was naked, and Matthew tells us that he prevented anyone from coming near. This is a truly supernatural demon with an unreal strength. Some people pick up on the point that Matthew says that 2 demon-possessed men confronted him as they were coming out of the tombs. So while Matthew records 2, Mark and Luke record 1, and for some people that's a big deal. I'm guessing Mark and Luke just focused on the one who eventually went and told others throughout the Decapolis what Jesus had done. I don't see a difficulty here. Perhaps the second one just didn't engage with Jesus like the first one did, and then that's the one that Mark and Luke chose to focus on. Cutting himself with stones. So cutting and other forms of self-mutilation, they were very common among the pagan religions. And again, we referenced the story in the first video of the priests of Baal in 1 Kings 18. So they were calling on Baal to consume the offering with fire. And when Baal wasn't, Elijah starts mocking them and they start cutting themselves with stones. The Torah prohibits cutting and inking of the skin because of this association with pagan and demon gods. Those, cutting was something the pagans did. And so God's people are not to do that. Note how specific Mark gets here. They didn't just see Jesus. They saw him from a distance. And he ran up and bowed down before him and shouting with a loud voice said, "What business do you have with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." And then Matthew adds, "Do not torment me before the appointed time." And then Mark 5:8 continues, "He had already been saying to him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.'" Lots of interesting things going on here. The demons apparently know they have a limited window of operation, and they know that Jesus is the one who will eventually come and put an end to them, which is a reminder that Satan knows his Bible, but something's amiss here, right? You're here early. What are you doing here? Is sort of the thought. Matthew 25:41, "He will say to those on his left, 'Depart from me, you accursed people, into the eternal fire, which what has been prepared for the devil and his angels.'" So as Lancaster quips, they seem to possess some strange sense of the passage of time. Their time is not yet up, and so his early arrival was, as Lancaster says, in bad taste. And so in other words, according to Matthew, they accuse Jesus of not fighting fair, which is kind of humorous when you get into it. All along the eastern side here, again, we talked about the sharply ascending hills that really meet in the shoreline. So it's very real that the demons could have spotted the disciples long before that the disciples spotted the man. They may have been watching him calm the storm and kind of following him. Where's this guy going? Then they know who he is, which is kind of creepy. The demons believe and tremble, we're told later in the New Testament. They call him Jesus, which is his physical identity, and then they call him Son of the Most High God, which is his spiritual identity. And we saw that last time when we looked at the Mark 1 verse when Jesus cast out the demon. The demon here is trying to invoke some kind of incantation or secret protection. They're trying to use the holy name of God to preempt what Jesus is about to do. Remember, the devil is a liar. He can use all the right words to try and trick us, including Christian sounding lingo or Jewish sounding lingo, such as "I implore you by God," trying to put Jesus under oath as if that would work. He had been saying, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Now, this is kind of fascinating. The demon is, in this case, is able to resist Jesus' first attempts at exorcism. Because usually Jesus speaks a word, and sometimes he's not even in the same town, and that person is healed. Not the case this time. I heard a phrase recently that makes a lot of sense. It says, "The enemy gets a move." And it refers to a chess game with experienced players, of which I am not one of them. I'm a terrible chess player. But to experienced players, both sides know the game is probably over, even though checkmate may still be 20 or 30 moves away. The soon-to-be loser can either resign or he or she can keep on playing in the hopes that their opponent might make a blunder. And a blunder is a formal term in chess that is a critically bad and often fatal move, or ends up you snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. You have the game won, but yet you mess up and make a bad move, and so your opponent can either win or draw. In either case, you didn't win the game. The enemy knows he's beaten, and yet he keeps on tormenting and sending fiery darts our way. And why does he do this? They know their time will end, and they know Jesus will end it, and yet they keep on doing this. They keep on sending their darts anyway. And the best answer is the enemy gets a move. He's trying to make us commit a blunder, to commit a fatal move and get us thrown off. Jesus is not going to do that. So, of course, their strategy is not going to work, but they're still trying it anyway. He was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the region. And then Luke 8:31 adds, "Do not send us into the abyss." And we'll touch on that in a moment. So apparently, according to proper exorcism procedures, I am told that once you can identify the demon's name, then the spirit has to yield. I don't know why this is, and I've not yet tested this theory, and by the way, don't plan to. But there you go. Jesus obtains his name, and then we're headed for the checkmate. It's very fascinating / creepy that demons tend to switch from first person singular to the first person plural. And we looked at that in the Mark 1 demon exorcism. He says, we and us and I interchangeably. And I know someone who's experienced this, and it was chilling. He's a believer, and he came across someone who he firmly believed to be demon possessed. And that person told my friend, "You make us uncomfortable." And my friend kind of startled and said, "What?" And the person replied, "You make me uncomfortable." And boy, that's kind of creepy. As Chuck Missler used to say, if you don't believe that the demon world is real, just try opposing them for a while, and you'll find out how real they are. So we have a play on Legion. Legion is about 6,000 Roman soldiers, and we'll come back to that Legion in a moment because I think there's a definite veiled reference and a pun in play with using that particular name. So the weirdness of the demons just continues, and we learn that they're fiercely territorial. They don't want to leave the region. They're in the Gentile region. They've staked a claim, and they're not about to be evicted so easily. Luke tells us that they were even more worried about being sent into the abuso in Greek, or the abyss. Now, Jewish tradition holds that the abyss is in the center of the earth, and it's a bottomless pit. And there's only one place that can be bottomless, and that's the center of the earth, because every direction goes up. Luke 8:31 is the only mention of the abyss in the Gospels. Paul mentions it once in Romans in reference to Christ's resurrection, and this leads some to speculate that in between Friday and Sunday, he went into the abyss and basically told the demons, "You lose, game over." And then he resurrected. When we get to Revelation, however, it's mentioned, the abuso or the abyss is mentioned 7 times, and I would say, of course, it's mentioned 7 times. 9:1 and 2. The 5th angel sounded and saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth that goes by the name of wormwood, kind of interesting, Chernobyl in Russian. And the key to the shaft of the abyss was given to him. He opened the shaft of the abyss, and smoke ascended out of the shaft as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened from the smoke of the shaft. So is the abuso a place that we want to visit? I would say probably not. We'll get back to Mark because the story just gets weirder and weirder. Now, there was a large herd of pigs feeding nearby on the mountain. Something's up because Jewish people don't deal in pigs, so you're not in a Jewish area, so we have pigs around. The demons begged him, saying, "Send us into the pigs so that we may enter them." Jesus gave them permission, and coming out, the unclean spirits entered into the pigs. The herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. Now, it's mildly humorous, but it is also incredibly odd. So we don't know exactly what's going on here, other than we certainly know that pigs do not graze near the Sea of Galilee today because the entire region is Jewish. So there's this unclean man. Now we can add unclean animals to the unclean man who's in the unclean place, possessed by the unclean spirits. And it's to me, it's fascinating to know that they had to get Jesus's permission in order to do this. And why does he agree to this? But he does. A herd is very specific. It's about 2,000 animals. So you've got about 6,000 demons in 2,000 animals. And it's just, we aren't told kind of what happens next. They definitely prefer human hosts, but apparently any form of embodiment is a good deal. And we can only speculate that perhaps they thought that this was the best deal they were going to get under the circumstances. They didn't want to go to the abuso, so it's better just to go into the pigs. And perhaps, they didn't know what the pigs would do next, or perhaps they orchestrated the pigs, running into the lake. And we'll get to that in a second. In any case, this demon-induced rush into the water would have been very dramatic. And as I said, the geography all along this side of the lake, the eastern side, really fits. And you can look at the pictures from two different regions and just see how, imagine, 2,000 pigs, screaming and squealing and charging down the sprinting down the slope all the way into the shore and, kind of bubbling and then the squeal stops. So it must have been really, really weird event to witness. And it's kind of, fun going there and say, hey, this is where the pig thing happened. There's another view of this area, and the building on the left, you can see the red roofs. Those are actually hotel rooms. And when we go to Israel in 2025, we will hopefully spend a few nights here right on the lake. We don't know which hotels we're getting, but this is one of them that we hope to get right near the Roman city of Hippos. And you can see Hippos is built on a hill, and it was kind of famous because it was a Roman camp, essentially. And they would light torches at night, and torches could be seen from Capernaum. So one of the things is when Jesus says a city on a hill, be a light, he could have been referring to the lights of Hippos, interestingly enough. In any case, it's an amazing spot where we kind of relive the story. And of course, the fact that you're just at a hotel and you can walk out to the Sea of Galilee is quite cool. More Roman symbolism, though. The artifact pictured is on display in the Israel Museum, and it's when the man says, "My name is Legion, for we are many," that of course has a Roman connotation because the Roman army outfits were named legions, and the 10th legion, Fretensis, which is what LEG, Legion, X is 10, and then F stands for Fretensis, was stationed in Syria at the time, and their symbol was a boar, and that's the animal that's on the bottom of the imprint there. The 10th Legion was heavily involved in the region during and after the time of Jesus, and it was the 10th, along with the 12th and 15th Legions, that put down the Jewish revolt that started in the year 66 and ended up with destroying the Jewish temple in 70. So the 10th Legion was definitely involved in all this. And so the event with the pigs, you got to think this through. So he's the Legion, pigs. The 10th Legion is the sign of a boar. It probably did nothing to persuade people that Jesus was not going to come topple Rome and restore the kingdom of Israel. So he's got this image of the legion, drowning themselves in unclean pigs, and I'm sure that was politically motivated for some of the disciples. And this is a joke that simply has to be told when we get to this passage of Scripture. "Send us into the pigs that we may enter them" becomes the first ever case of deviled ham. And that joke just never gets old. The herdsmen, back to the story, the herdsmen of the pigs ran away and reported it in the city and in the countryside. And the people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the man who had been demon-possessed sitting down, clothed and in his right mind. The very man who had previously had the legion, and they became frightened. I bet something weird has just happened. Those who had seen it described it to them and how it happened, and the demon-possessed man, and all about the pigs. And they began to beg him to leave their region. Now, you might expect them to say, "Wow, Jesus, you're the greatest healer in the world. How can we ever thank you?" But that's not what they do. Turns out human nature is what it is. Jesus is bad for business. The demons wanted to stay in the region, but the people want Jesus to leave the region. And that's just how it is with people who don't know Jesus. They just react completely counterintuitively. They should have welcomed him. And we'll see a scene when Jesus heals a person in Capernaum that people fled him. They want more. They want more healing. But these people want him to leave. So again, back to our thought that the enemy gets a move. One commentator suggested that the demons destroyed the pigs in order to have this very reaction where the pigs' owners would be against Jesus. They would force him to leave, and in their view, his mission there would have been unsuccessful. The African-American author James Baldwin has a famous quote: "The most dangerous creation of any society is the man who has nothing to lose." And I guess we could say the same for demons who have nothing to lose. They're going to lay it all on the table. They're not going to go down quietly. This demon is very similar to a scene in Acts 16 where Paul comes upon another demon-possessed person. It happened, Acts 16, verse 16, it happened as we were going to the place of prayer. This is in Philippi, by the way. A slave woman who had a spirit of divination met us and was bringing great profit to her masters by fortune-telling. She followed Paul to us and cried out repeatedly, saying, "These men are bondservants of the Most High God, who are proclaiming to you a way of salvation." Now, that's the truth. Just like the demon in Gadara, they're telling the truth that Jesus is the Most High God. But Paul has no appetite for any testimony from a demon, no matter how accurate it is. And the same can be said for Jesus. Verse 18, "Now she was continually doing this for many days, but Paul was greatly annoyed, and he turned and said to the spirit, 'I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her.' And it came out at that very moment. But when her masters saw that their hope of profit was suddenly gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities," and the story goes on. So in Capernaum, as I mentioned, the people brought out the sick and infirm to be healed. But in the Gentile regions, they want Jesus gone, and here they want Paul arrested. The cost of demon cleansing is just too high, and we got to put money before anything else. And that just kind of shows you the mindset of a life that doesn't have the creator of the universe, the God of Israel, Jesus, as the center of their lives. "And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed," at least this guy tries to do the right thing, "was begging him that he might accompany him. He wants, 'I want to go with you. I want to be one of your disciples.' Jesus did not let him, but he said to him, 'Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done to you, and how he had mercy on you.' And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed." And I love that turnabout there. Jesus says, "Go and do the great things the Lord has done for you." He turns around and says, "Look at all the things Jesus did for me." And so I think here Mark is undeniably stating that Adonai, Hashem, the name, Kurios in Greek, Yeshua, Jesus, Jesus, they're all the same person. Who healed the man? Was it Adonai? Was it Jesus? And the answer is yes, because they're one and the same. And so that's, it's often, skeptics will say that Jesus never claimed to be God. Well, that's not true. You have to read carefully. He's definitely claiming to be God. And Mark is reporting that to us right here. A couple of questions though. Why does Jesus deny the man's request? And why in this instance does he tell the man to go tell everyone when usually he tells the person to keep quiet after a miracle? Well, Lancaster suggests that the answer to number one has to do with perhaps it's not the right time to have a Gentile disciple. His primary message was to the Jew first. It was in Jewish lands. Having a Gentile, tagging along might have upset that mission. People would have focused more on the Gentile than on Jesus' message. So it wasn't time for that. Paul will get to that in the book of Acts. Now, the second, why does he tell him to tell everyone when he usually tells people to keep quiet? Lancaster thinks it might have been a matter of crowd control because the Jewish crowds were already flocking to him as a Jewish Messiah. You can see the reaction in the Gentile lands was, go away, please don't stay. Mark told us earlier about in the Jewish regions, Jesus could no longer publicly enter a city, and they were coming out of everywhere. Mark 1, verse 45. So perhaps Jesus wanted things quiet because the Romans would have seized him or tried to before his appointed time. Of course, they're very nervous about Jewish zealots, and Jesus was probably concerned that zealots would, infiltrate his ranks and use Jesus' message for not good purposes. But in Gentile territory, there's none of these concerns. They were also unlikely to cross into a Jewish territory and follow a Jewish rabbi, so the crowds would have kind of been self-contained. Craig Keener points out that without clarification, the Gentiles would have assumed that this man was healed by some kind of magic. And so, quoting Dr. Keener, he urges his new disciple to spread the word about what God has done, thereby correcting the people's misunderstanding about the magician. So all of those are possible. Todd Boland makes the point that later in Mark, Jesus is going to be passing through the Decapolis again, and a large crowd's going to gather, leading to the feeding of the 4,000. We'll get to that in Mark chapter 7 and chapter 8. So it's possible that many in the crowd of the feeding of the 4,000 learned of Jesus' ministry from this testimony here of the ex-demoniac. So that's kind of fun. What you see pictured is not Hippos, but it's the town of Scythopolis, and it's also known as Beth Shean in the Bible. I don't know that we're going to visit Hippos, but we'll definitely visit here. And it's interesting, it's the only Decapolis city east of the Jordan River, and it's an incredibly well-preserved Roman city right in the heart of Israel. And one of the things that hits you is just the contrast. Rome did everything massive, go big or go home. And so you have to picture the culture shock for the first century Jewish farmers and fishermen who, they've been taught that God is sufficient, rely on God. And then they come to a place like this where you have need of nothing. You even have toilets and running water, and your mind is blown as you think about that contrast. And of course, the message for us is the same, right? What do we have need of? We can go to the store. We don't even have to leave our home. We just go, pick up our phone, and then 2 days later, whatever we want is here. But, Jesus said, you think you're rich, but you don't realize you're poor and have need of nothing. So we need to rely on God. We need to realize that God is sufficient for our needs and he will meet our needs and not rely on the things of this world. So that's one of the big lessons that we learn from visiting places like Beth Shean. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to disrupt the flow of this fun story, but there is a chiasm in Mark 5 that is worth noting because it just talks about the organization of the Gospels. And these are all over the New Testament. It's just a way of, and Old Testament, it's just a way of writing that you tell the story with bookending different things. So the A section starts with a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met Jesus. And then the parallel would be at the end of the story, seeing Jesus, he ran up and bowed down before him. B tells us he was dwelling among the tombs, and then B prime tells us he was screaming among the tombs. Got a parallel there. C, no one was able to bind him anymore, and then he repeats that no one was strong enough to subdue him. And then the D section talks about bound with shackles and chains, and then chains torn and shackles broken, and then it works its way back out. I think these are fascinating because they talk about not just telling a story, but telling a story stylistically and making it fun and making it entertaining, and that's why the Bible is just so much fun to study. Next time we'll look at Mark 5:21 through 43, which is the fascinating double healings of the woman with the 12-year issue of blood, and then the healing of Jairus' 12-year-old daughter. And so we'll see you in a couple weeks as we continue our journey through the Gospels along the Talmidim Way.